Welcome to the second episode this week of the Fenway Rundown podcast here on MassLive. I'm Sean McAdam, joined by my usual co-host Chris Cotillo, and we're thrilled today to be able to speak with Greg Whiteley, who is the director of the upcoming series on Netflix that you have no doubt heard so much about over the last year, The Clubhouse, a season with the Boston Red Sox. Greg joins us from his home, I believe, in Southern California. Greg, how are you? Thanks for being with us.
Oh, it's great being with you, Sean. Thanks.
Uh, a lot of build up to this, a year plus in the making. But let's start at the beginning, which is only logical. Give us a little background on how this project came together, how you came up with the idea, and how you convinced the Red Sox, along with Major League Baseball, to take part in this project.
Sean, this is going back probably 4 years, but it was Major League Baseball that came to us, if memory serves. I think they approached Netflix. Netflix approached us. I think they were interested in the producers of Last Chance U doing the same thing with baseball. We had been approached by other pro leagues. Without getting specific, you could probably guess them. And any major pro league in North America has approached us about doing something similar. And the talks have always stalled at the same point. It's at the moment when we explain to them that they can't have editorial control of a documentary, that things start to fall apart. And with Major League Baseball, it began with them saying, we don't want editorial control. And we want to introduce you to some teams. We want you to start having some conversations. They know what you need in order to do the type of work you want to do. And we think we've got a handful of teams that will raise their hand. They'll want to be a part of this and pick one. And so we did. And it became obvious as we met with a handful of teams that Major League Baseball wanted us to meet with, that there was just one team that was really ready to do this more than any other, and that was the Boston Red Sox. From an organizational standpoint, they immediately understood what we were trying to do and were completely supportive of it. And when I mean completely, from the ownership to the front office to the manager, and then eventually to the players, that their only caveat to us as we met with ownership in the front office was, hey, we need you to go and meet with the players. And if the players want to do it, then we're going to support it. We think this would be good for baseball, and we think it would be good for the Boston Red Sox, but the players would have to be on board with this before we could support it. And they were very smart about how they set that up. I flew out there and I met with, I think it was about 19 baseball players that they were confident were going to be on next year's team. And I sat there for about an hour answering questions. And then I was told later that the team got together and decided they wanted to do this. And then we were off and running.
But as a filmmaker, Greg, and as someone who has directed a number of sports-themed documentaries, you also have seen the popularity of something like Hard Knocks on HBO, which is another sort of pull the curtain back, see what it's like behind the scenes with a professional team. Why do you think that that kind of doc has gained traction and entices people and viewers, and for that matter, filmmakers like yourself? What makes it an emerging kind of genre here?
Well, I think I can only speak to me personally of why I find it interesting. To me, what I find interesting about covering sports is that you've got intense people generally that are trying really hard to do something. And what sports affords us is a schedule in which the whole key to our storytelling, Sean, and you and I think I've had conversations about this. The whole key to our storytelling is, can I find someone that the audience would fall in love with? They would begin to empathize with them. And how I would measure that love is, can the audience, can I discern that the audience will begin to want what they want? And then can I film whether or not they get it? And in sports, I think you've got a collection of people that you get to choose from. And so you're going to find the people that you kind of gravitate towards, and you're going to trust that that's who the audience is going to love as well. And then because they're playing a sport, you kind of know already what they want. They want to win either a conference championship or a cheerleading national title, or they want to make the playoffs. And I've learned in this style of storytelling, it really doesn't matter whether or not they actually get it. You just have to film them trying hard to get it and film whether or not they do. If they get it, it becomes a feel-good story. It's elation. If they don't get it, it's heartbreaking and kind of tragic. And so I think in sports generally, we're gifted with something that documentarians are always pining for, which is a schedule that you can take and make a budget that then you can take to some place like Netflix, and they go, okay, yeah, I'll buy that. And almost every other element or any other genre of documentary filmmaking, you really don't know how long you're going to go, and so it becomes difficult to build a budget. But with a Major League Baseball season, you know how long it's going to go. It's going to go a long, long time.
Greg, I'm not surprised at all that the Red Sox were the team based on a couple years ago. We have these, kind of casual lunches with management and ownership. Not John Henry usually, but Sam Kennedy's usually in there. And a couple years ago, during one of those, someone asked, like, "What's the next frontier for you guys?" And he said, well, he was in love with the Full Swings of the world and all these different types of documentaries that had come out. And he said, baseball needs to do that. We need to do that. I want us to do that. And so there, comes the cooperation that you got, and they were the team that had their hand up. I wanted to ask you, level of cooperation throughout the season, right? You had guys that were all in on this probably from the beginning. You had guys, we've heard Kenley Jansen, some others who told you, like from the beginning, and he's been on the record saying we probably didn't want to be interviewed, guys like that. And what was there kind of your guys from the beginning, and then the guys who just wanted to go about their business? And was there anything during the season where you found a guy who was all in at the beginning, and as time went on, you said, you know what, let's keep the cameras away a little bit?
Well, I would say yes to all of that. And
Hmm.
even in Kenley Jansen, he was saying, I'm fine with you filming
Right.
baseball and me. I just don't want you to follow me
Hmm.
home.
Right.
And I don't want to be the focus of your documentary. And
Hmm.
that was the deal that we made with the players. That's the deal that we made with the cheerleaders in Corsicana and the
Yep.
cheerleaders in Dallas and the football players in Scuba, Mississippi was, hey, we will film you if you want to be filmed. The moment you don't want to be filmed, we aren't going to film you. And there were plenty of times when a player from the very beginning was all in, and then they would go 0 for 5, and they wanted nothing to do with us for a couple of days. And that was normal. The nice thing is, over 162 games, was that you got a taste of a lot of different people who at different points were willing to open up and share their lives.
Hmm.
And I think over time they began to realize that there's a style to our filmmaking in which we just sort of blend into the day to day, and we're not getting in the way of what they're doing. And if there's ever a moment in which a player suspects that we might be getting in the way, it just takes one word or one gesture and they know we're gone. Fortunately, there were a couple of people that were very consistent in saying, yep, I signed up for this. I want this. I want to support this project. And we could, for the most part, count on them to wear a mic and to be filmed. And as a result, I think we got fairly unprecedented stuff, especially when it comes to the coverage of baseball.
And whether it comes to the level of cooperation or something else, what surprised you the most about this process?
I think um, I think if you would have told me that, if you would have asked me, when do you think baseball players show up to the ballpark for a 7 o'clock game? I would have said 5 o'clock.
Hmm.
Maybe if you're ambitious, you get there at 4.
Well, the
It
Red
wouldn't
Sox
have
have had
occurred to
some guys that do show up at 5 o'clock the last couple of years, but that's not good. That's not good for them.
on this team. I think anybody that showed up past noon I felt like was getting
Hmm.
sideways looks from their teammates. In fact, I think the majority of players were there at 10 a.m., 11 a.m. in the morning, and they were busy. They weren't just hanging out. They were anxiously engaged in preparing for the game. That was something I found very surprising. I would have assumed I would be spending a ton of time with players hanging out in their homes and going out on the town. there was surprisingly little of that. It happens, obviously, but the amount of free time that these players have during a season is scant. That shocked me.
This is largely chronological over 8 episodes, Greg. It's sort of, although there's a little back and forth in the beginning, it sort of starts in spring training and it winds down in September and mirrors the length of the season. But you chose kind of some themes for most of the episodes and people that you mostly focus on in an episode. Um, Talk a little bit, if you would, about deciding how to plot this out. You obviously had mountains of footage and untold hours of raw footage and B-roll and sitting down with players and miking them up. I can't imagine what the editing process was like, although you did talk to me a little bit about it as it was going on, and you were saying that even as it was being filmed, you were starting to edit a little bit. But if you could talk a little bit about how you decided to structure the 8 episodes around basic themes or personalities.
Well, so we begin filming when catchers and pitchers report in spring training. That was our first day, and we're filming all that. As we start filming, I would say within a couple of weeks, we have our earliest editors being hired. So Mark Morgan, who is a supervising editor, Adam Leibowitz, who is an executive producer and runs post production, Ross Lindstrom, who runs a story team and had a lot of help underneath him. And there's about an army of when we grow to our zenith, Sean, which is about the middle of the season, where we now are beginning to cut together episodes 1 and 2 while we're still shooting. You've got people like Mark Cummins who know baseball backward and forward, and then you have other people that have never seen a baseball game in their life that are all attempting to assemble different footage. And so you've got a cut of episode 1 that's about 5.5 hours long at one point. And so you can imagine what's being eliminated in order to tell the story. And as you just said it, as you're going, there are just certain players that you keep going back to, and and they become main characters. None of that is decided ahead of time. It's all decided as you're going. And we've learned to try and do that sooner than later, because you run the risk. What I see other documentaries do, particularly other sports documentaries, is you just kind of try and cover everyone. And what happens is you get a very superficial take on a lot of different players. And I think to go deep and where you're really starting to get true personal character arcs during a course of a season, you that requires you to focus on few rather than many. And I'm not sure if this is quite answering your question, but along that process, themes begin to organically emerge. There are things that happen in someone's personal life, like the fixing of a Bronco, that begin to poetically comment on a particular at bat. And so, oh, well, that's great. Why don't we spend a little bit of time with Jeren Duran in this episode, and we can tell his backstory. We can tell the story of this particular game in which he had a moment that we felt was noteworthy to his arc. And so that was sort of the thinking behind, we're trying to tell the story of a season, so it sort of makes sense to go chronologically. But it also made sense. You'll notice during the balance of the season, we'll jump back to spring training to show you Brian Bayo having a certain moment in which he learns a certain pitch, and it pays off later in So that kind of stuff you can only do when you're afforded the kind of time that Netflix is giving us. Whereas Hard Knocks is kind of hamstrung in that if you're going to do only spring training, they've since pivoted, of course, to do a whole season. But before, when you just had spring training and you had to churn out an episode before you'd even finish filming the following week of spring training or their whatever, their summer camp, this affords us the time to kind of dig deep, find themes, put characters here, shift them around in episodes. And I think it's a more fun way to tell a story.
I think when this project first launched, Greg, and Sean and I definitely had these conversations, probably before he knew he was going to be the star of the show. And as I said, fair, way too much Sean McAdam in this thing. So, other than that, it's great.
Not possible as far as I'm concerned.
Um, I think the general consensus was like the Red Sox probably aren't going to be good. They're probably going to be middling. They don't seem to have big personalities. This isn't the Red Sox in their heyday. Like, how are they going to come up with something interesting over a middling team? And I think, including, Sean and I would probably cop to this too. I think that kind of sold short, like, the themes that emerge, the characters that emerge. Like, you're not telling the story of an 81 and 81 team. You're telling all the little stories that make that up. Would you say that's a correct way to put it?
Yeah, Chris, I don't know you well enough to know if you have kids.
No, I do not.
Um, Maybe you've got nephews or something,
Hmm.
but if you've ever had the experience of going to a little league game where on paper, if you didn't know any of the kids playing, it's probably going to be a pretty boring afternoon. You,
Right.
you you better be there for some other reason than to watch baseball in order to be engaged. However, if your kid is playing in that game, suddenly that becomes the most fascinating at bat you've ever seen.
Right.
And I feel like that is our job in this type of storytelling is you want to develop a kinship with Tristan Casas or Brian Bayo or Jeren Duran uh, in such a way that when they are at the plate, you are aching for them. When Cam Boozer makes his debut, you want to know enough about him that you're feeling, at least to a degree, what his parents are feeling there in the stands watching it for the first time. You really don't care if the team wins or loses in that particular moment. You just care about Cam Boozer. And I feel like if we can do that, the team itself can do anything. They could win, they could lose, they could go 500, and it will still be interesting. It'll still be a story worth hearing and telling.
Greg, this uh, documentary, as I said, focuses on characters. I think the two that jump out to me as someone who is around the team and watched this, I think Casas and Duran, one and two. And I think when people see this, Jeren Duran and his story will be the talking point. It has been obviously for the last few years around here, and he is a guy who people know. I think before this, a lot of what he's gone through and his big rise last year. But obviously, you guys got to something that has not been revealed before in his suicide attempt and him opening up in a way that I was, I think, as someone who's around it every day, just completely, taken aback and obviously, um, you know, almost stunned by it. What was that day like, and what can you say about the process of talking to Jeren, going through those interviews, and the level of trust it almost takes to get to that point with him?
I feel like all credit goes to Jaren. I didn't do anything
Hmm.
different with Jaren than I did with anybody else. I will say that I spent enough time with Jaren that I began to suspect that there may be something like that in his background. And I also began to suspect that he was very comfortable in talking about it. He's the one that led that.
Right.
And I get the impression it was something he almost looks at it as he would. He feels, I think, a sort of obligation to kids, as he's explained it to me, uh, kids in particular, but maybe anybody that would be struggling with mental illness and the loneliness that comes with it. And I think the false perception that you're the only one on planet Earth that is feeling this way, and maybe even acting out on some of those feelings. You feel completely alone, and as a result, I think he has looked at it almost as a calling. I want to make sure that if there's even one kid out there that felt like I have felt, that they know they're not alone. And if they can draw some inspiration from the fact that I made it through those difficult times and enjoying the year that he was enjoying last year, frankly,
Hmm.
that should give hope to all of us. And so, as a filmmaker, I don't think I did anything unique or special. I feel like this was something that Jaren was driving that bus.
Right. And I'll one more follow up on that. We have covered Sean and I and everybody at MassLive have covered him talking about this for years. You hear in the clip as part of that episode 4, us talking about it on the show. He was first kind of revealing those mental struggles in 2022 in a story he did with me. And I've always kind of taken the path with him that, you know, if he wants to share, it's totally, fair game, but it's hard to know, as someone asking the questions, when to push and when it's so sensitive, when stuff like that is surfacing. How did you and your team, and you said, you let him drive the bus, but how did you and your team deal with not only the interview process there, but also, deciding what got in and what didn't?
It's purely a function of the story. I'm like behind me. Your listeners aren't gonna be able to see it, but I have this exercise that I do, and I've got other people on my team like Ross Lindstrom, Mark Cummins, etc., Mark Morgan, that they've got their own processes, but it's essentially this. Once upon a time, blank, every day, blank, until one day, blank, because of that, blank, because of that, blank, until finally, blank. And you fill in the blanks, and that becomes your story. And then it's really a process of eliminating even really great scenes,
Hmm.
really good moments with other really interesting people, because it doesn't quite help you with your blanks. In fact, it distracts the audience. It's a deviation. I think you can do it to a degree. To some point, you need to have Jeremiah Poop, or you need to have the guy that designs the mud for the baseballs to bring in color. But even in those instances, you're trying to find ways in which Jeremiah Poop's uh, tour of Boston is going to comment in a poetic way on the larger story you're telling on the Red Sox.
You obviously, as you noted at the beginning here, Greg, had the cooperation of the organization and the players. They knew that you and your crew were going to be embedded from season's beginning all the way through the end. Were there players who bristled at the access and became more withdrawn, or in fact withdrew altogether from the project that had previously signaled they were willing to take part?
Well, there were lots of people, Sean, that at the very beginning were really open. They were excited. They wanted to do it. And then I think as they learned that we wanted to go home with them and that we wanted to film their backstories, suddenly became reticent. I don't want to name names, but particularly people that were in a contract year. that became kind of nerve-wracking for them, and for reasons that you could completely sympathize with. And so our deal with the players from the very beginning was, we are going to film you as long as you are okay with it. The moment you're not okay, we'll stop filming. And so we did that. There were some that were very eager at the beginning, enthusiastic, and in ways that I still find kind of heartbreaking and a little puzzling, just became reticent. I don't know if there was something in their personal lives that happened, or if there was a wife that suddenly got cold feet. That would all make sense to me, but we were fortunate in that the players that I think we initially fell in love with remained for the most part true. They wanted from the beginning to stay with us. I will say every single person at one point or another did not want to be bothered. And it was, if somebody went 0 for 5, or if they gave up 6 runs in the seventh, we just learned over time the next day was going to be a tough day to ask him to wear a mic.
Right.
But I will say, for the most part, even after bad days, there was a cadre of players that were like, "Hey, I want to do this. This story needs to be told. Let's do it." And just to name two, Casas and Duran were great about that.
Greg, were there any blow-ups with players along the way?
I don't know that I ever had any true blow-ups with players. I'll tell you one funny story. I mean, yeah. So there was a pitcher, and this pitcher is well known for being mercurial, and he would sometimes wear a mic and sometimes wouldn't, but he would almost never wear one on days that he was pitching. But on days that he was pitching, we would ask, just because that was a really good mic to get. If you could get the mic on the pitcher, and we almost, for the most part, did. And this pitcher he said, "Okay, yeah, I want to wear one." And at the time, if I remember, he was on a bit of a heater, so he took the mic and went went out there and had a difficult outing, and he came. We came back, and we have a guy that when somebody is heading to the showers, they'll go and they'll meet him just because he'll forget that he's got the mic when he's getting undressed and he might need some help. And so the guy showed up and goes, "Hey, do you want some help with your mic?" He goes, "No, I got it." And he takes it and he completely rips the mic in half and hands it to us. And then later, to his credit, came back and profusely apologized. Was not mad at us, was just mad at how the day went. And you guys have been around these players enough to
Mm-hmm.
know the difference between success and failure is so small that I think it invites a level of frustration that over time we just learned to sympathize with it.
Yeah, we'd never name names, but you can do a follow up in San Diego at some point.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, there was a period um, because of budget and funding where you were not around for a good chunk of August. That led to some maybe misunderstandings with some people, some bruised feelings. There was a worry that you were abandoning them because they had fallen out of contention. Talk a little bit about that, Greg, if you would, being away for a couple of weeks and the fallout from that.
Yeah, I'm glad that we get the chance to talk about this. There was a budget that Netflix asked us for, and over the years we've gotten better and better at being able to predict, and we even will pad it a little bit. And so we gave Netflix a budget, said, "Look, we think we can do it for this is what we think we can do this for." And of course, this is the first time we're doing a Major League Baseball show. It's 162 games. It's a very expensive show to do, and so we said, "All right, here's what we need." And Netflix said, "Okay, if you could do it for that amount, we're in. Let's do that." But it didn't account at the time of filming all of spring training. And Alex Cora, after the budget had been approved, pulled me aside and said, "Hey, you need to be here for all of spring training." I mean, I think the budget accounted for maybe we'd be there for 2 weeks. They said, "No, that's when you really get to know the players. That's when they get to know you. And so you've got to invest in that time." And he was 100% right. And so we just filmed, I think we filmed everything but a week of spring training. And it was exactly the right thing to do, even though not all of that footage is going to end up there. It still afforded us the time to just hang out with the players and have them get comfortable with who we were and to better understand how we would be filming. And but I just thought, well, at some point we have to make this up, and I didn't know when. And the season was always interesting because even if the team was in a funk, you still had a player that you were following that was doing really interesting stuff, and you could never predict when was somebody going to get injured. When was somebody going to go 5 for 5? When was somebody going to break the home run streak or and you needed to be there for that stuff. And we just simply looked at, unless we take some time off to make up for the money that we spent during spring training, we were going to miss the end of the season. And we all knew we couldn't miss that. Regardless of how the season turned out, we knew we couldn't miss the end. And so we took a little break. And an interesting thing happened. When we left, the team went into a funk. And I think you'd have to ask Alex about this. I don't want him to get angry with me, but my sense is Alex sort of used us as motivation in that even Netflix has quit on you guys. You guys, but I'm not going to quit on you, and you can't quit on you. And so the team kind of got fired up. So that by the time we get back, they were kind of pissed at us. And it took about 48 hours. I was really worried for about 48 hours, like, oh my gosh, they're not gonna, nobody's gonna take a mic. We're gonna film the rest of the season, and no one will talk to us. And then things kind of relaxed, and we got back to normal.
The series is The Clubhouse. It is available on Netflix beginning Tuesday, April 8th. And it is, despite your use of me, Greg, masterful storytelling. Chris and I are veterans of the beat. We're around this team a long time. We saw things that surprised us. I think if you're a fan, you are really going to enjoy the curtain being pulled back and a look inside what it's like to spend a season with a Major League Baseball team, in this case, the Boston Red Sox. The Clubhouse, released on Netflix Tuesday, April 8th. And we recommend it highly. Greg, thrilled to have you with us. Thanks for the time today.